The movie footage in this episode of the Retrograde is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Dead Jester Cinema does not claim ownership over the footage used, and is using the subject matter for educational, commentary, and criticism purposes under the fair use of Section 107 of the Copyright Act.
What is going on YouTube, and welcome back to the Retrograde right here on Dead Jester Cinema. Now this edition of the Retrograde, and probably many other editions of the Retrograde going forward, are going to be a little bit different since YouTube likes to copyright strike my videos. But as you're well aware, I have already gone through the first 3 Indiana Jones movies, so that means we have gotten up to number 4, which is Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which sees our hero in a race through South America to find a magical relic with non-specific supernatural properties before the Red Army does, because they plan to do something with it. Now it goes without saying that this film is arguably the most notorious entry in the franchise, not so much for being divisive, split 50-50, but because it's almost universally hated by fans. But is the movie really that bad? Well, let's just dive into it and let's see what happens. Oh yeah, that's right. Since I mentioned before how YouTube and Paramount Pictures love flagging my shit, we're not going to go through the entire movie. What we're going to do now from here on out is just jump right over into the grading portion of this little review. But let me get my thoughts of the movie out of the way first. For everyone that says Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is their least favorite film in the franchise, I certainly can't argue against that point. It's got a frustratingly blend of a weak story, dubious characters and character decisions, questionable CGI, really hokey attempts at comedy, unintentionally stupid and cringe moments, and in my opinion, Steven Spielberg's weakest effort on an Indiana Jones movie, as it's obviously well known that he had no interest in returning for a 4th installment and had to have his arm twisted by George Lucas to do so.
Come on.
And I think it shows in a lot of ways, as this film doesn't have the same inspired direction as previous entries, and feels very paint by numbers by Steven Spielberg's typical high standards. And unlike previous films in this franchise, I think this one leans a little too heavy on the blue screening and digital backgrounds, especially in scenes that don't need it. It just lacks the authenticity that filming practically in front of the camera has to it, thus making Crystal Skull look pretty cheap and fake. But let's take some time now to talk about the story, which isn't terrible, but it's not really that good either. Even though I consider this story arguably the weakest one in the franchise to this point, it's not all bad. The beginning is quite strong, reintroducing us to Indy and kickstarting the chase for the Crystal Skull at this Area 51-like military base, even if they go a lot ridiculous by jumping the shark or nuking the fridge, as the kids like to say today. And I do like the ending, interdimensional space aliens included, or whatever the hell they're supposed to be.
He said, yeah, they're not aliens, they're kind of extra-dimensional. I said, what?
Interdimensional beings, in point of fact.
He said, okay, these are interdimensional beings. They're not extraterrestrials, they're interdimensional. So I said, fine. And what are they going to look like? George said, look like aliens.
You heard him.
But unfortunately, it's the middle chunk of this movie that feels like it just meanders around until it figures out what it wants to do. And what I mean by that is that there isn't any sense of urgency in finding the Crystal Skull. And with that, there are no clear stakes for us as an audience to be invested in. And I think a large part of that problem is the fact that you have this MacGuffin, the Crystal Skull, that's really not well defined. It's definitely an intriguing MacGuffin, and I certainly like the looks of it, but since a lot of the mythology and lore behind the real Crystal Skulls isn't as defined as, say, the Ark of the Covenant or the Holy Grail, the writers had to make up a lot of this on their own, like psychic mind control and space aliens, and then try to connect it all to real-life legends of the mythical lost city of El Dorado. It's too many ideas being forced to connect, and it doesn't give a clear explanation as to why it's being sought after. So is the Crystal Skull ultimately a key to fortune and glory? Is it a pathway to ultimate supreme knowledge? Or is it, a weapon of psychic mind control warfare? Well, yes, it's all of those things. And in being all of those things, it ultimately is nothing.
What is this thing?
Not sure how many drafts and rewrites the script went through, but it really does feel like the Skull was the victim of too many drafts from different writers who all had their idea of what it should be, and in the end they just couldn't make up their minds. Now, one of the other frustrating aspects to this movie is the characters. Now, not all of them, mind you, but a couple. What makes them frustrating is that they're a mixed nuts of some good, some okay, and one stupidly annoying piece of dog shit. But let's get the good out of the way first. Harrison Ford as Indy is once again terrific. Even if he is AARP qualified at this point, he is still in remarkable shape and can believably pull off all the traditional action moments we come to expect. Now, I will admit some scenes like this,
This is crazy! Somebody's gonna get hurt!
or this,
Kid, what the hell are we doing, kid? Kill us! Well, maybe.
they don't seem like traditional Indy behavior to me. They seem more like something his father would say, and certainly not the devil may care Indy from the original three. Plus, I don't like seeing him actively helping the bad guys in this movie. I mean, it's excusable in the beginning to a degree, and he ultimately springs a trap to kind of set himself free and get out of that situation. But here in the middle, in this Russian camp, Indy's busy, helping decipher all these friggin' cryptic clues, and it's Mutt that actually intervenes and springs everybody, and Indy chastises him for it. Hashtag not my Indiana Jones. Like, imagine Indy doing this same thing with the Nazis. It just doesn't jive. Speaking of which, the Russians, I just don't find as menacing a threat as the Nazis, or even the Thuggee cult for that matter. Now, maybe because I didn't live through the Cold War that I don't fully get it, but I've seen enough Bond movies to understand the global threat they were. But do I think more could have been done to make them threatening and menacing? Yeah, obviously. But getting back to characters that I liked, and yes, Shia LaBeouf as Mutt Williams is one of those ones. I think he did a great job. My only complaint was the revelation of him being Indy's son felt forced, cheap, and cliche, or whatever appropriate adjective you want to use. It's a reveal that didn't need to exist and has no bearing on the story itself, and it seems it's only there to serve as flat, situational comedy fluff. But now that brings us around to some of those middling characters. They're so-so because they aren't really great, but they aren't really that bad. In the case of Marion, while it is nice to see Karen Allen return in her iconic role that we haven't seen her in since 1981, her presence does feel like it's shoehorned into the story just for nostalgia's sake. So while I love Marion and Karen Allen, and as much as it pains me to say this, she's completely superfluous and offers nothing to the story. Irina Spalko, played by Cate Blanchett, is an interesting, albeit a non-intimidating villain. I don't think they do much in the way of padding out her villainy enough. Now, it's nothing against Cate Blanchett, she does a fine job, I just think her character is weakly written. And the same goes for Harold Oxley, played by John Hurt. Now, a lot like Cate Blanchett, John Hurt is a really good actor, but I feel like his talents are completely wasted in this role, and it all just kind of feels like stunt casting. But the piece de resistance, the cherry on top of the sundae of shit characters, is Mac. Nothing against Ray Winstone personally, he's a very fine actor, and through no fault of his own, this character is just completely fucking terrible and useless.
So what are you, a triple agent?
Thank you, Indy. Let's start there. Double crosses and swerves are nothing new in this franchise, and when it's done well, it can actually mean something. But the problem here is that he and Indy's friendship is the product of backstory exposition right out of the gate. So when the turn happens 5 minutes later, it has zero impact. Perhaps saving that reveal until the end, after he's helped Indy along for the entire movie, well, then maybe that turn means more because it was earned. But flipping him right off the bat, then having him turn back to be good, just to turn heel again?
So what are you,
A triple agent?
Nah, I just lied about being a double.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you weren't a triple agent. You just lied about it. Thanks, Mac.
The fun part about Mac is you never quite know whether to believe him or not.
He's a double agent. But he's a double agent who's forgotten. He's a double agent who don't know who he's working for.
It's all just lazy writing. And then this bit at the end, where he's greedy 1 minute, and then the next minute he kind of wants to sacrifice himself. I mean, for what? Are we supposed to care? Well, I don't. Fuck him. Sayonara, asshole. Now, before I wrap things up, I just want to quickly touch upon the score by John Williams here. John Williams once again turns in a solid outing, but in my opinion, not one that stacks up as well to the original three. While it certainly is better than the copy and paste efforts we would see from him a little later, Crystal Skull does carve out its own musical identity, with standout tracks being Call of the Crystal and Irina's theme. They help give this movie a signature sound and motif that resonates throughout its entire runtime, but unfortunately the rest of the score just kind of plateaus from there on out. Well, anyways, that was my quick kind of summarization of my thoughts and feelings about Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull and the various different aspects of the movie. So now let's just kick this shit on over to the grading scale and let's see how this movie grades out. Alright, as you can see, here is the grading breakdown. The story gets a C, direction gets a C, characters also get a C, the music gets a B+, and the bonus category of the MacGuffin, which is the Crystal Skull, also gets a C. So that means with all those grades combined, we are sitting at a 76.6%, which means that Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull earns the grade of just barely a C+. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is not a bad movie, certainly not as bad as a lot of fans make it out to be. It's just not all that great, and definitely pales in comparison to the original three films. A weak story with a weak plot and weak characters just makes for an overall average experience. With Indiana Jones, I want to be wowed and swept away in adventure, and I just don't get all of that here. But that being said, the movie still has a bit of that old classic Indiana Jones charm that only Steven Spielberg can provide. And while it definitely has its fair share of problems, I still do have fun watching it. Take out a couple of those eye-rolling moments and stupid characters and tighten up the story just a little bit, and I think this would be a worthy successor to the originals. It's not really that far off. Well, everybody, that was it. That was my total thoughts on Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. A movie that, like I said, is not really that great, but it's not really that bad either. It's just kind of average, and I think it gets a bad rap for being awful because people just like to knee-jerk reaction to shit and go overboard and go to the extreme. But all things considered, it's not that bad, and trust me, I've seen some bad shit on this channel. But anyways, do you guys think I have graded it fairly, or do you think I was a little too lenient? Do you think I should have been more strict with it? Please post your own grades below and post your own thoughts and opinions. And as always, like, comment, and subscribe. Adios. Now, GTFO!